about different environments for that baby in utero? Can that have influences on, if there are some of these positive aspects of a woman's life, such as rituals that are helping her, or if there's that negative side of things, toxic stress?
Yeah, so we know that the environment, genes sort of build the blueprint, but what sometimes is misunderstood is that genes don't act independently either of each other, or they don't act independently of what's going on in the environment. In fact, genes are designed and built to be influenced by experiences. So, the human, we have about 23,000 genes. And I often say that's only 4,000 more than a worm. And we're a whole lot more complicated than a worm. So how can we get this brain built and the rest of the child built with only 4,000 more genes than the worm? Well, it turns out that environment and experiences are able to have tremendous influences on when genes are used, when they're turned on and turned off. Every cell in our body has the same genes, but our liver and our brain are very different from each other because there's what we call regulation of which genes are turned on and off, and then that's part of the process of building the healthy architecture. So what are the kinds of environments that are influential? Well, it's very clear now that what we would call toxic stress, or chronic stressful experiences that in the pregnant mom evoke cortisol responses and autonomic nervous system responses that stay in sort of what I would call high gear, where your foot is always on the gas pedal and eventually the motor is going to burn out. So, that's a point where you've got a lot of stress going on. It turns out that there are certain parts of the brain that are most vulnerable to that. There are parts of the brain that are involved in cognition, and there are also the same parts of the brain that are involved in emotional control. It turns out that those same parts of the brain of the fetus likewise are sort of super sensitive to those stressors. The mom is producing stress hormones. How she responds to toxic stresses is going to get translated into the fetal environment through the placenta, which we know now is not just this passive filter kind of sitting there providing nutrients solely to the fetus, but it's part of the developmental process. And mom's stress status can affect the biology of the placenta, and that's really important in terms of the health of the fetus. Mom's general physical health is a very important factor in the healthy development of the fetus. That her nutritional status, her status in terms of her weight and the kinds of food that she eats can have an influence on the fetus as well. The brain in an adult utilizes about 70% of the energy that we take in from food, right? We learn that even in grade school. I think my granddaughter just learned that. But in the fetus, it occupies even more. It takes an enormous amount of energy. So mom's nutritional status and her general health status are really important. We know that infections during pregnancy, particularly if they occur, over and over again, that increases risk for certain outcomes of the fetus when they're born. Mental health risks, physical health risks. And of course, we know now that obesity during pregnancy actually has an impact on the development of the parts of the brain of the fetus that are going to control their own appetite. It's amazing, right, that this relationship is preparing the fetus for what it thinks it's going to have to deal with later on in life. And that's sort of the miracle of the developmental process. I think it also speaks to this issue about adaptation, that the fetus during the development is adapting to what it thinks it's going to have to be dealing with. So all these things that we've talked about in terms of the environment, the stressors, high stress, parts of the brain that are vulnerable for that, nutritional status, infections and other sorts of things that can affect the mom's health. That's going to affect the biology of how the fetus is going to develop, particularly parts of the brain that we know are so important for controlling these very same issues when they are children.
Really what you're describing, it seems, if you sort of pull the camera back, is a process by which how the woman is leading her life and qualities in her life that are going to shape the fetus that could look like, if we want to be simple, just a pure so-called genetic transmission. You have a gene for this, and then your baby has the same behavior or maladaptation. They must have the same gene, rather than it's getting passed down through the mother's health and how that shapes the baby for the future world. So it's really a different model of how problems or health can travel in families.
Yeah, I think I think the point of distinguishing between what we kind of viewed previously as heritable. If you see something in the mom or dad and you see it in the fetus, therefore it must be an inherited trait. And we know that some of those, eye color and hair color generally, and general size, those sorts of things, are factors that, those are traits that get inherited. There's certain kinds of other biological features that are heritable, but genes are really there to create opportunities. And what we know now is that the opportunities are how the environment is affecting development. So when we see a trait, a behavior, an approach to doing something in a parent, and then we see it in the child, we used to think it was only heritable, but we know now that in fact there was a developmental process in which that behavior emerged, and part of it is how the brain was being built during fetal development as well as its continued development after birth. And there's a lot of research now that has been going on to look at what we call transgenerational passage of non-genetic, where you see the same thing occurring in the mom and in her offspring and in the offspring's offspring, right? It's quite amazing.
Yes.
And that's only within the last, I would say, 10 years or so, where this information has sort of exploded. So now the environment and experiences during pregnancy and after, from that what we call the 0 to 3 period, we now realize we knew they were important, but now we realize really just how important they are in terms of building healthy brain architecture.